Greetings, fellow conspirators. It is I, LG Grande. Good to have you here for another Liberty Conspiracy video. And thank you so much for the positive responses to the videos we produced so far. We'll have a lot more coming your way. If you want to contact me, all that information will be available at the end of the video. Big thanks again to Liberty Doll for having me on live on Friday night. I hope you'll visit her video channel on YouTube and also on BitChute. Definitely look for her there because who knows what's going to happen on YouTube. You can find us, The Liberty Conspiracy, on Facebook as long as we are allowed to survive there for a little while longer. And my Twitter information will be available at the end of this video production. I am Gardner Goldsmith, LG Grande, buenos whatever. Good to see you, my friends, in a manner of speaking. Fellow conspirators, let's get together and thank you for doing so, to conspire a little bit for freedom. I'd like to run through a few of the top stories for today and bring back one from yesterday to draw out some intellectual ammunition for long-term wisdom. And finally, I'd like to spell out why Alan Dershowitz is wrong on many levels when he says you have no constitutional right not to be vaccinated. We'll try to get to that one if we have time. First, I want to turn to a number of the news stories that are out there. So follow me, shall we, into the land of make-believe? All right, first off, you might have seen this one out there on the news. This is an interesting move by Donald Trump. Donald Trump says he's taking hydroxychloroquine as a prophylaxis against corona, you-know-what, cowabunga virus, as they say. So, yes, he's taking that in association with zinc. And as I mentioned, let me see, I've mentioned this numerous times on Facebook. I mentioned it for an MRC TV video. I had to take hydroxychloroquine back in the 90s. I'm very familiar with it. It's an immunosuppressant that many people with lupus actually take. People with RA also take it. And it works along a particular chemical chain in the immune system called interleukin-2. And that helps mediate the immune response for many people. It is a derivative of quinine, and my dad actually had to take it in World War II to help prevent malaria, and it causes the fingernails to turn yellow. It's pretty innocuous. People with major heart problems are not supposed to take high amounts of it, but you can usually take about 400 milligrams a day, and that's okay. 200 milligrams, very much lower level. I'm not giving any recommendations, but this is typically what you'll see for prescriptions for people with lupus and things like that, RA. And one of the interesting things to note is that during the Obama administration, the FDA banned the manufacture and sale by American companies of quinine tablets, which many people used to take because it helps stop twitching in the legs at night. So now they have to get it from Canada. Ridiculous. And we'll talk a little bit more about freedom to be able to buy things for yourself without harming anybody else in the future. That seems to be a basic one for many people, and yet we can't seem to get over the lock that the FDA has on people making choices about ingesting things for themselves. So this is interesting because Trump has been criticized greatly about hydroxychloroquine. Just to let you know, the two studies that I've seen so far that the pop media claims where hydroxychloroquine is not effective on the coronavirus, this particular coronavirus, the Wuhan coronavirus, both of them were weighted in such a way that they're not even really studies. The bulk of the people who were given hydroxychloroquine were the sickest in the pool. They were the people who were closest to death, and they really had no control group. It was just ridiculous in both those instances. That's ridiculous, and there is so much evidence that shows, even going back to 2005, with a study that was funded by the NIH, and this, again, is a reason why I have been very skeptical. I was skeptical about Anthony Fauci back in 2014 when they had the Ebola outbreak, and he said that Ebola couldn't be spread if you were asymptomatic, which was false. It's a very low likelihood that you'll spread it, but it just depends on the titer amount for the virus inside the body to tell whether you can spread Ebola. And of course, he screwed up that royally, sent people into a particular place. Some of the people got infected. Remember when it manifested in Texas? Just a few cases, but it could have been very bad, thanks to, unfortunately, the mismanagement of that guy, central to everything, Anthony Fauci. Why there's even a position for that, I don't know. But obviously, if there is going to be a position for that, you don't want Anthony Fauci in there. And we'll talk about how it's not constitutional or ethical in the first place at another date. But this is very interesting because back in 2005, there was a study that showed that hydroxychloroquine was very effective in stopping SARS, sudden acute respiratory syndrome, from affecting the ACE2 receptors in the lungs. So it already was shown, and Anthony Fauci should have known about it because he helped get the study funded. So he never mentioned any of this in any of the press conferences, even before Donald Trump mentioned it in his press conferences himself. So all that information is out there. Of course, there's a New York doctor who's treated almost 1,000 people with hydroxychloroquine. There have been celebrities like the star of Hawaii Five-0 who took it and thanked people for giving him hydroxychloroquine. So many different cases. Eventually, every piece of data, every datum is an anecdote when it starts. But as you start to build them up, they become data, and you can start to theorize and test. And it looks like, from many of the tests that have been done and many of the real-world examples, hydroxychloroquine is effective in this. And there seems to be a major, very dark reason that the pop media is trying to poo-poo this. I think, personally, I think they have been trying to prolong the lockdowns to destroy the economy and to up the ante on just how much authoritarianism Americans will take and completely disregard the U.S. Constitution, which we're going to go into a little bit more. And again, this is just on the constitutional level, and I'll tell you why in many cases the constitutional level is not even acceptable for someone who believes in freedom. So Trump is going to take this because, of course, people in the White House have been exposed to the virus. He's taking this as a possible preventative measure, and you'll see that in studies already of people who regularly take hydroxychloroquine for lupus or RA, that virtually none of them have come down with the coronavirus from Wuhan. Okay, next I want to turn to this story, and it's just a brief one. Again, more of the authoritarianism, this from the Free Thought Project, New York State. The Rutherford Institute is now warning the state that it will consider filing a First Amendment lawsuit if police continue to threaten a New York church with prosecution and $1,000 fines for holding drive-in worship services that adhere to social distancing guidelines. Just unbelievable that New York State is still doing this. Andrew Cuomo should be ashamed of himself, and of course, I don't know whether or not he's even capable of doing that. Maybe he'll wake up someday. On the lighter side of things, in the news update, I want to give you this one. CNN reporter Caitlin Collins caught removing face mask when she thought the camera was off. This is really funny. Check this out. They're such hypocrites. It's incredible. Oh, my goodness. I love it.
And I like your pink blazer, Caitlin.
Thank you. Can you tell us more infections at the White House? Have there been any more positive tests?
Here she is right there. And, oh, you're all done now. You can go home, Caitlin. Ah, that feels so good. What a joke. It's just theater. It's all theater. Oh, man. Then also from the New York Post comes this one. Cops shut down Brooklyn yeshiva over coronavirus violations. More New York. NYPD shut down an Orthodox school in Brooklyn on Monday for violating city and state social distancing restrictions. Okay, again, from a standpoint of pure freedom, at a certain point, you've got to say who has the prerogative over the raising of the children, the state or parents. The state can only, and if people think the state has to have some part in this, just remember, the state can only enforce this by forcing people who don't want to pay for the enforcement. We're not just even talking only about the parents being guarded over by the state just in case they might do something bad and send the kids to some dangerous school. We're talking about a domino system, a dandelion, you might say, with multiple things sticking out that attach to other people who are forced to pay for a system that will step in and do this to a school where the parents have voluntarily sent their children. Okay? This is not just about the parents, it's about other people the state forces to pay for this. So there is no excuse to get the government involved because there is no excuse for state form of government. There you go. It's pretty straightforward. Now I want to turn to the MRC Media Research Center and our MRC TV website, because this one I think you'll find pretty interesting. Arizona reopened restaurant can't find workers because unemployment pays better. There you go. I think that says it all. Oh, by the way, I want to go back very quickly. This was also an MRC TV story, and I just want to bring this up briefly. We're going to touch on this again in a little bit. You'll see this New York man jailed in Hawaii for violating self-quarantine after Instagram photos showed him at a beach. The beach! It's like Seinfeld. Smells like the beach. The beach! Now, I had a comment from my friend Jay. He said, no onus on the state to prove the pictures were from this year or unedited to prove anything. It is now sufficed to be accused that one must prove themselves, himself or herself, innocent. And that's the slyest part of it all, of all. That the Kafka of it all is now complete. Good point. I mean, if you read Camus' The Stranger, you read Camus' The Plague. This is absurdist. It's Kafkaesque. In fact, it's in a way, it's much like Terry Gilliam's Brazil. But those are on the practical sides of it. I'll get back to one of the principal things on this in just a minute. Now, let's go over to some of the other things that are happening out there. You might have seen some of these things popping up a lot. And this story, this comes from Microsoft and the Associated Press, which are very difficult to trust nowadays, but we'll take this one for what it is. Judge tosses out Oregon's coronavirus restrictions. Why? Was it because they completely broke the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth, and of course the 14th Amendment, and also broke the contract clause of the United States Constitution? And again, in the last video I mentioned we're going to do a larger video about all those aspects. No. Nope. Not at all. A county judge has declared Oregon Governor Kate Brown's coronavirus restrictions null and void because she didn't have her emergency orders approved by the legislature following 28 days. Oh, I see. So it's all within the technicalities of the statutes and the way they operate. That's the only thing the judge ruled upon here, to leave a preposition dangling. I see. Okay, thanks for that great constitutional protection, you swearer of an oath, Judge. Great job. And shame on you, Kate Brown. Now, this you might find interesting. The bars were packed with patrons almost immediately after a court struck down the stay-at-home order in Wisconsin. Just going to mention that briefly. And then over here, federal judge overrules North Carolina governor's restrictions on worship. A federal judge overturned North Carolina Democrat Governor Roy Cooper's orders Saturday that sought to cap religious services at no more than 10 people, while businesses and other organizations in the state were left to accommodate up to 50. Again, court stuff. The double standard, the district court said District Court Judge James C. Dever ruled in the Eastern District Court of North Carolina was an overt show of distrust among those gathering to worship and deemed the directive illegal, according to the News and Observer. All right, no mention as to whether or not this has to do with the 14th Amendment or anything like that, but it does seem to be that it's some sort of application of an understanding that it's not an equal application of the law. Strictly speaking, the 14th Amendment is not that the law will be equally applied. It's that the law will equally protect people. And again, that shows you how far Americans have strayed from the original concept of why government was supposed to, and I don't even agree with this argument, but on the Lockean, Jeffersonian terms, government was supposed to exist only to protect people. And that goes towards some of what our friend Alan Dershowitz is arguing, because he is way off base when he argues that you have no constitutional right. Again, constitutional right, we'll talk about that, not to be vaccinated. We'll see if we can fit that in this program. Now, the majority of time I want to spend here, though, is with this story. I want to go back because in our last video, I brought up this very interesting story where Gary Franchi of the Next News Network, sorry Gary, I freeze-framed you as you were blinking, who does great work. Gary is awesome, and if you haven't subscribed to the Next News Network, I hope you will. It's terrific. I mean, look at 1.58 million subscribers. A lot of people have. So anyway, Gary had this conversation with Pennsylvania State Senator Douglas Mastriano. And he's a former military man, and I just want to offer some soft criticism here, because Mastriano made some terrific points about their health minister in Pennsylvania, and how this woman had basically pulled her 95-year-old mother out of a nursing home. I think it was her mother, and might have been grandmother, but I think it was her mother, out of a nursing home, and put her in a special place away from the nursing homes that she and the governor were filling with people who were positive for Cowabunga 19. Just amazing double standard there, just ridiculous. And of course, Gary made a great point. You know, they're creating death traps in these places. Okay. There is something important here that I wanted. There are two things that are important here that I want to discuss. One has to do with some of those legal cases that I was discussing just a few minutes ago. But the other is a bit of a soft criticism here. And we'll go to Gary as he wraps things up with the state senator.
Abroad, and now you're defending freedom here on your home territory. How does that make you feel?
Okay, so he mentions the man's military service. He says, you know, you defended America and the Constitution and freedom, I'm paraphrasing Gary, abroad, and how do you feel about having to do this here? Obviously, you know I'm clued into something that I want to discuss. And again, it's a soft criticism, but I think it's very important to bring this up.
Yeah, obviously there's some mixed feelings about that. I'm glad to be in this fight here. Obviously, there's other opportunities when I retire from the Army with all the credentials I have, and I'm thankful to be on the front lines here and fighting for freedom. On the other hand, though, it's really troubling that we once our basic rights, our basic freedoms, our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, going back to our Declaration, that the very essential and soul of America now is at risk. There's a 1-minute speech by Ronald Reagan in 1961 where he talks about if we don't do our due diligence here, we'll be, God forbid, we'll be in our older years sitting on a porch telling our children and grandchildren what it was like to be free. Abraham Lincoln, when he came, I'm sorry. Benjamin Franklin, when he came out of Harper's Hall, Liberty Hall in Philadelphia in 1787 at the end of the Constitutional Convention, was confronted by a lady who said, what do we have, Mr. Franklin, a republic or a king? And Benjamin Franklin said rightly, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. Now it's our turn to keep it.
Okay, I just want to mention that story about Benjamin Franklin. It's some people wonder whether it might be apocryphal. We don't really know, but it's a terrific story for those people who feel patriotic and feel that they want to do honor to the people who fought in the American Revolution and so on and so forth. But there's another dimension to this, and I think it's very important to bring this up. And so there are two facets to this. And unfortunately for Senator Mastriano, I do want to say that he was in the military and he has deployed overseas, as he and Gary discussed, and he swore an oath to protect and defend that U.S. Constitution. Now here, he is doing so. He is trying to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution against what the Pennsylvania governor is doing, and that is extremely laudable. I do not want to criticize this man too harshly, okay? However, I think it's incumbent on anybody who is on the constitutional level or deeper than the constitutional level towards freedom and individual liberty to recognize that when he entered the military, he swore an oath to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution. And as I mentioned to Liberty Doll on the 15th of May in our live stream, I have run into many military people in airports, and I have, in conversation, brought up to them in very peaceful ways and asked them if they wouldn't mind answering just a couple questions, and if they felt uncomfortable, they didn't have to answer them in any way whatsoever. But I've asked them if they're being deployed, and they say yes. Where are you going? I'm going to Iraq, I'm going to Afghanistan, wherever they might be going. And then I say, well, you swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, correct? Yes. There is only one power in the Constitution that grants the president the power to command the troops outside the United States, and that is if Congress declares war. There has been no war declared. How do you feel that you're going out in an unconstitutional military operation that runs contrary to your oath? And unfortunately, this is exactly what Senator Mastriano did. So I do want to bring that up. I think it's important to bring that up. And I know that many people who have friends in the military think that they're doing the right thing in defending America and American freedom. John McCain, when he ran for president, said, "I swore an oath to defend the United States." No, you didn't, Senator McCain. You swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and to answer and abide by lawful commands. Lawful meaning constitutional commands, because that is supposed to be the supreme law. That's why the founders followed Aristotle in trying to write a constitution with specific rules that could be changed if the document were amended. Otherwise, you don't change things as you go, because that negates the entire effort of having written it in the first place. Now, beyond that, I'll say again that the Constitution, as far as true legality on a human-to-human basis, is forced on people. It is not a valid contract, because contracts require two or more willing participants. And I am certainly not willing. I would see it as a fallback and say it would be an improvement if the United States government were to return to at least a semblance of constitutional operations. But it is certainly not valid to say that the Constitution applies to Americans in any way whatsoever. That would be like saying we all bought General Motors cars and we accept the idea that there's some sort of a bailout, or that we all bought someone else's house because he's sending us the bill. It doesn't work that way. So I just want to bring that up. Now, the final point that I want to bring up is that Douglas Mastriano is bringing suit against the governor, and they are calling for their health secretary to resign because of her double standard and lack of expertise. Something that I want to bring up here is that people who, let me just check out a couple of my tabs here. Oh, geez. You know what? Yeah, I'll give this to you as in the end as a little treat. All right, how's that? Yeah, I'll give this to you in the end as a little treat. People who sue the state and claim that they've gotten sort of some sort of victory, I think it's important to recognize that one can't entirely celebrate a court siding with a plaintiff against an authoritarian governor or some other figure on the executive branch or the legislative branch, because that court itself represents authoritarianism. So let's look at that Hawaii story again. Over here, Jay made this point, and I made this point. I said, absolutely, Jay, you hit it. And there is no victim here. no one with a claim to harm. The only harm being perpetrated is the harm inflicted on the taxpayers being forced to pay for the police, legislative, and justice system. An ironic title, that last, justice system, since any justice system based on the state is founded in coercion and non-choice through force and taxation. So it is, by definition, unjust. There is no getting around that. If it is based on force, it is not based on justice. Aggressive force. And I think that's something very important to keep in mind. So let's bring up a little lesson. When one wins a court case against the actions of a legislature or executive branch of the state, it does not mean that the individual has won a victory for individual liberty. The state used his money to fund the courts that reached said position. This is no different than one mafia member negating another mafia member from punching you, even as the first mobster demands your wallet to stop the punch. And will continue to demand your wallet. And if you don't hand over your wallet, well, guess what? You'll get more than punched. So those are a few things I wanted to bring up. In fact, I will go into the story about Alan Dershowitz later. I'll make a separate video on that. You can see I've got it all queued up here from the original source, Jason Goodman, who does very good work. I find many of his videos fascinating. I first heard about this story from High Impact, from Brian Young on High Impact Vlogs, and he's just awesome. But I'll leave you with this one, which is a people's victory, in a way. Small, but again, not complete. And this one comes from News Wars, the InfoWars alternative. And by the way, if you try to post any of their stories on Facebook, it's nearly impossible. So you have to do these roundabouts by doing it through Gab and then posting Gab to Twitter and then taking Twitter and posting that to Facebook, because Facebook recognizes not the News Wars source, but the Gab source. And it's totally roundabout and stupid, but you have to do it that way. But I thought this was great. A New Jersey gym reopened in defiance of Governor Chris Murphy's shutdown order, and patrons were waiting for the state to respond with a heavy hand. Attila's gym co-owner Ian Smith announced his intention to violate the order because he has to run his business to survive. We'll see the reaction from law enforcement. We'll see the reaction from Governor Murphy. Smith said, "We're here being civilly disobedient." Boom. Right back to Thomas Aquinas. This is why I teach Thomas Aquinas to my students in ethics and economics class. Being peaceful. I'm running a business as I should be able to. Very good. So here's the original conversation with Catherine Scott, who's the ABC affiliate reporter who was on the scene there with him. And here's what he had to say.
I would say it's going great. We'll see them. We'll see the reaction from law enforcement. We'll see the reaction from Governor Murphy. We're here being civilly disobedient, being peaceful, operating a business as we should be able to.
Okay. Very good. That was beforehand. They were open and the police did arrive. And here's the big deal. So many people were there. We don't know what the police intended originally, but here's how it turned out.
Speak your piece and don't worry about it. We are and we're only here for everybody's safety today. We plan for the worst, hope for the best, and it seems like that's what we have out here today. Yeah. Formally, you are all in violation of the executive order. On that note, have a good day. Everybody be safe.
All right. Some humanity. So again, it's an interesting form of satisfaction because in the immediate, the people were civilly disobedient and the police noted that they were in violation of the executive order, and the cops said on that note, "Have a nice day," and he walked away. So for that brief instant, there was a sense of victory. The question is, can that be continued to complete victory? Well, those police officers will still be getting their paychecks through coercion and force. More force was not applied in this case. The police left them alone. So it didn't get worse. And in fact, perhaps it got a little bit better compared to what the governor expects in New Jersey. Some things to think about. Now, when we come back next time, I'll try to cover that Alan Dershowitz story and tell you why, on many levels, Alan Dershowitz's logic and knowledge of natural rights is insufficient and does not work. But until then, I thank you so much, everybody. Don't forget, we're just starting, so if you have the opportunity to share these with friends and like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. And as I said, we're going to take little chunks of these things. Each time we have a different program, we'll try to remember something and carry it with us, and we'll try to put together larger stories, maybe once a week, that give us that intellectual ammunition and that timeless knowledge to carry with us and hand off to other people. Until then, thanks again, everyone. Be seeing you.